So I thought it might be helpful if you knew a little bit more about me and what my ecumenical experience is. And I thought I would just give you some highlights about that. I sort of accidentally went to Bosse in 1978 to 1979. My theology professor, who at that time was this very feared and respected, Robert, what was his name? J. Bob Nelson. And everybody was afraid to take theology from him, but I did because I needed it. And he just recommended that I go. I was like, what the heck? I guess I'll go. And Ken too. So we went to Bosse for 1978 to 1979. And it was, people casually say, oh, that was transformational about something or other. And this was truly transformational. It gave us this incredible global perspective. It just widened our understanding of what ecumenism is. There were few Orthodox at that time, but that was very, very new. One of our best friends was an Ethiopian Orthodox priest who was just kind of comatose for the first 3 days and then a whole lot of fun. But Europe was a big shock to him. And we learned a lot about Ethiopia during those times. And I still have relationships with people that we still have relationships with people that we were at Bosse with, and I'm sure Jean does too. They just last forever, especially if you're in the ecumenical world. After a while in 1980, I served a church. In 1984, I began to serve a church in Cleveland Heights, which is a first ring suburb. About outside of Cleveland, and it was a Jewish Christian community by and large, and so we had a lot of conversations about how you navigate holidays in the school system. And we had, our ministerial group was ecumenical and interfaith, and we had a lot of interaction between the Jewish communities and the Christian. And then also the youth. This is one of the cool parts. I didn't actually do it, but the youth in all of our churches or faith groups would come together for this annual gathering where they had to describe their own religion to someone else. Now, I think this is a really good thing for youth to do. So that was a winner to begin with. And then they listened to what others said. And my kids always came home wanting to belong to the Baha'i because they loved the diversity of the Baha'is. Like, can't we be Baha'i? I was like, yeah, thank you. But we're pretty inclusive. So, and I was in a Jewish community also in a local church on a little further out suburb. Just as at the time I was elected to the episcopacy. So certainly my grounding has been in Judaism. And when I went to Minnesota as an as the bishop, there was an ecumenical organization, which aren't always so strong these days, the Minnesota Council of Churches. State Council of Churches have really been defunded, and not all of them are really able to do a lot. And you might know some of this from your own experience, but the Minnesota Council of Churches was very strong. They were the major refugee resettlement. So part of it was that they got money for resettling refugees, which has, I'm sure, strapped them terribly during the last 4 years. But one example, we always went to the Hill. We had the Hill Days, which was to go to the state capitol on a certain day, Muslim, Jewish, Christian, and we advocated for the things that had been worked out ahead of time that we all agreed on. And so there was a lot of work that went into just going. And then you go there and it was just beautiful. And so that had been happening for a long time. Then I should remember, I think it was 2007 maybe, or 2009. the I-35 bridge collapsed in Minnesota, or Minneapolis, you may remember. It was terrible. 13 people died, but I think it had more shock waves than just the number of people who died. Bridges are not supposed to fall, as Amy Klobuchar said. And within just a couple of days, we had this big ecumenical interfaith service. And it was just beautiful and affirmed everybody. And everybody was very happy with it. And somebody asked the person who really kind of put this together, how long did you work on this? And she answered, 10 years, which of course meant for 10 years, they had been working on relationships that they could bring together in a crisis to develop a service of prayer and song and testimony that was pleasing and satisfying to everyone. And that just kind of underscores for me, I love that story. It took them 10 years of relationship. And that's kind of the key thing about ecumenism and interfaith relationships. In Chicago, I've had really good relationships too, but we have dinners and whatnot with the Muslim community. But I never feel the depth of those as much because we come together, we eat, we talk, we have speakers, and there's some of that. But my own personal relationships have been with the Jewish community again. I personally take Hebrew scripture study from an Orthodox rabbi. And this is just like my favorite thing in the world to do. And I've always loved scripture. And I have learned a different hermeneutic by studying with him. And, as a result, we share foundationally faith. And I've always felt like sharing scripture brings people together when it's done right. I also gather once a month with Jewish women and in United Methodism in Chicago, there's a number of us who are like bishops or general secretaries. And we meet with this Jewish group once a month for scripture study, and we study women in the scriptures. And we have had just this incredible theological experiences that have been really powerful for all of us. And we've also become really good friends. I've always kind of desired, I don't know if you've ever read the book, The Faith Club, that three women who came together after 9/11 wrote. And they explored their faith together. And the cross and Palestine nearly derailed them, but they worked through it. And they all learned from somebody else's tradition in such a way that their own faith was deepened. I love that. It's a little dated, but I wish we had something like that today. So that's kind of my experience. And hopefully just a little bit of that might have been interesting to you. But, as Tura would know, since she's from the Northern Illinois Annual Conference, and I assume that she was on our annual conference last Saturday, that our annual, I'm not calling you out, Tura, it's fine, that our annual conference's theme was Why Church for a lot of reasons. And so I think one of the things that kind of launches me into all of this is why ecumenism? Because through our internal disputes and under threats of separation internally, sort of our survival mode, we have really lessened our commitment and understanding of why we are at least ecumenical. And so that's probably one of the things that I hope there are some ways for us to creatively address. And I'll look forward to hearing from you when I stop talking in just a couple of minutes. If you feel like maybe you hadn't addressed it quite like that before, but do you feel like you too at times have to sort of have an apologetic about ecumenism. Why ecumenism? At times, well, we have good reason to worry about the funding of our ecumenical work in the United Methodist Church. And I think, again, it's because we need to reinforce the whole business of why ecumenism. And I personally believe that in this revitalization of ecumenism, we need to strengthen our relationships during these times in all of our denominations, to work together with each other, and particularly in a world where fewer and fewer people have faith, a connection with the faith community. One of the things that I think is beginning to emerge, and Jean might even want to say something about this, is that in these gatherings of the National Council of Churches, World Council of Churches, and some of the others, the whole conversation about anti-racism has come up over and over again. And most of those meetings have been spent talking about dealing with anti-racism in our denominations. So I think one of the things that's so exciting is that by having an intern this summer, we were able to revamp the curriculum under Jean's and Kyle's guidance. And I do encourage all of you to make sure that people are able to get on that, and maybe that will also strengthen our ability to articulate why ecumenism. So I apologize if I have gone on too long, but I wanted to just give an overview of who I am and sort of some of the things that are important to me. And I mostly look forward to hearing how that resonates or not with you in terms of your local work.
Thank you, Bishop. That was a wonderful introduction to all of us working with you more closely in the coming days and months and years, whatever it might look like, depending on all of our particular spots in our quadrenniums that we're in as well. I guess I would like to open it up. Are there specific questions that we have for Bishop Dyck before we get into any other storytelling and things like that? Do you guys have questions for her? This is a really talkative bunch. I know it's really hard to keep all of you quiet.
You fall asleep.
Was there anything that resonated specifically with you, or ways forward that resonated with you from what she said that you wanted to expand on or ask her to expand on?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Bird, is that you?
This is Bird.
Yeah, go ahead, and then Rodney.
One thing that really resonates were the personal relationships that Bishop Dyck talked about in the groupings both in Minnesota and in Northern Illinois. And I would just reflect that one forum, I guess you could say, that brings those faith groups together often especially in urban areas. And that's an opportunity that I have had, and a gift that I've had here in San Antonio, Texas, is MLK activities in January. And I chair the planning committee for our annual interfaith worship service. That is a citywide service that is actually a part of the citywide MLK commission for the march. And we have the largest march in San Antonio, Texas. We have the largest march in the USA. It's a great gift to me, but those personal relationships are sown at that table planning that service, and a great bit of love and deepening of my own faith from the experience, just like Bishop Dyck said it perfectly.
Thanksgiving is the other one. I just did a video for the Rockford, Illinois Intercouncil, I forget, Interfaith Council's Thanksgiving service. And, you know, again, it might be a little bit like our Muslim dinners in Northern Illinois, where they just have normally come together, eat, you know, everybody sings their favorite Thanksgiving song or something and go home. But I really tried to challenge them with a little bit of the story and more about just the relationships that get built. So Thanksgiving, and I think you're absolutely right, Bird. You know, I mean, Thanksgiving and MLK, I think, are critical.
Rodney, I saw you unmute a moment ago. Did you want to add something?
I just had a question for the bishop, since the questions are open. So as much as, you know, we've done quite a bit of this work in the Detroit and Michigan area here, though we don't have the best communication across the United Methodist churches across the state in working with this. A lot of independent people are doing it independently, and we're working on changing that right now. But we've, one of the things that I've discovered is we have a much closer working relationship with the Christian groups that I know with the Muslim community than we do within the Christian community ourselves. Is there, and it's like we get together, but usually it's get together under the umbrella of something that the Muslim church, that the Muslims are doing, Islam is doing, but if we do it independently, then we tend not to get as much participation out of the own Christian group. So less ecumenical work and more of the interfaith work happening there. And you know, and it seems to get bigger reactions when you do stuff through the multicultural. So what is it that, do you have any recommendations on strengthening the ecumenical side of that, of those relationships?
Well, you know, I'm not sure what the history is, but again, I think the key is one way or another, relationships. So even if the clergy if you can get clergy together, I mean, there's some great opportunity. I mean, obviously you may not be able to meet in person, but it's in the connections, I think, that I've seen that work the best, that there were clergy who were committed to it, like the rabbis in Cleveland Heights and the Christian clergy in Cleveland Heights who were committed to as this being important. I would suggest that maybe it's a symptom of this why ecumenism, or didn't we already work that out thing, you know? You know, I think it's funny because when I was thinking about this, I remembered before I went to school, and I didn't go to kindergarten, so it probably was when I was kindergarten age. I remember going with my parents to a town ecumenical event where we went to each of the churches and heard about each church. I remember this. I don't remember everything about my childhood, but I remember this. It was a big deal that people from these churches would go to each other's churches. Now, that's just Main Street. You know, we do things together and don't even think about it so much. Of course, there's some denominations that won't accept women or something like that. But, you know, I wonder if it's just kind of like, oh, I thought we took care of that. And then when you want them to show up with an interreligious gathering, it might be harder. I don't know. I think that's part of what's going on.
Is that for me,
Robert?
Vera? Yeah. Good afternoon, Bishop, and thank you for being with us. I'm from the Peninsula Delaware Conference, And I acknowledge right away my perspective is a little different because we're so small. I mean, relationships come very easy because we have a relatively small amount of territory and a relatively small um, number of churches. I'm curious. Something you said is I think really um, is really true in ecumenism, and it may be it's almost a happy hindrance. Is a lot of folks figure that we have already done these things,
Right.
and I remember 2 years ago at one of the national workshop gatherings, uh, I think Kyle or Gene, I don't remember which of you facilitated a session on the Methodist Episcopalian get together, and I had this old fellow nudge me next door, and he said, "We've been doing this for years. Anything wrong with that?" And I think that's the way
Yeah.
I know a lot of my brothers and sisters here. I've celebrated communion or performed sacraments in Episcopal churches, and I think it's because always have done it that way. It never occurred to us we're doing anything wrong. Building on that, I mean, the fact that there is some relationship between, especially among the mainstream, what I would call the mainstream churches. I think sometimes the media calls us the Seven Sisters, the larger uh, non-Roman churches. Since we seem to have worked out to some degree our relationships with the obvious partners, the Episcopalians, which is I think will happen. It just isn't happening this year. The Evangelical Lutherans and the Moravians. Where do we go next? I mean, it just seems there are a lot of partnerships that are not happening because of theology or even history, but they just happen because, frankly, we need partners in this day and age. I mean, who is there anybody else we're going to be talking to formally?
Well, I think that's something we'll address. So one of the things I think is going to be a little bit interesting is that if in fact there are these groups under the umbrella of Methodist who separate from the United Methodist Church, how much of what it says, in our theological task or constitution about the foundation of ecumenism, how much will they take that with them? And what kind of relationship will we then have with them or they would have with us? I mean, I'm clueless about what the answer is, but I I think that that's going to be something that we end up addressing one way or another in the next few years. Other denominations, maybe Jean knows best in terms of what has begun in other of our partners.
Right. I think it's a great question, Bob. Of course, it's Bob's question. And the trend these days is to bilateral dialogues over multilateral dialogues. And in fact, the ELCA and the Episcopal Church have pretty much said that's the only thing they're going to do. And so the disciples and those who are more interested in multilateral dialogues are beginning to make that shift to focusing on bilaterals. The ELCA has a new dialogue, I believe, with the disciples. And so I would expect that we would talk about those kinds of conversations. We've talked about possible conversations with the Mennonite Church and possibly with the Presbyterian Church.
Oh, that would be
Hey, Bishop. But all of that is kind of honestly on hold until after we get through General Conference and we see who we are.
Well, I could share with you that at every gathering, ecumenical gathering that I'm a part of, that's the number one question.
Yeah.
Is what happens next with you guys? And I mean, depending on the position of the person who's asking it, a lot of it is, I mean, Gene, I wish they had been to the meeting that we had where you spoke to us, kind of in a closed room, because most of them are that I hear from my colleagues here is you're going to be better off afterward because you will know who you are and you can proceed accordingly. Although I heard one of your colleagues, Bishop, say, and somebody I respect very much, say, just because you're conservative doesn't mean you have to leave.
And we
And I-
hope that's the case.
Yeah,
We
I mean, I
don't
thought that
want-
was incredibly wise.
I mean, we don't want. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to be in a church that everybody's like me, because you know what? It's impossible. I mean, whatever I would be, you know, we need some diversity theologically. That's what keeps us sharp. The discussions, I haven't been a part of these bilateral discussions, but it sharpens what you believe and what's important to your tradition in a way that if you're kind of, you know, waltzing down the road just on your own, you don't always have to do, or you do it in battle with those who disagree with you in your own denomination. I would love it if we had a bilateral with the Mennonite Church.
Right. And if I might also, it's important to note that our different ecumenical partners are looking at the current Methodist realities, United Methodist realities in different ways. Our
Right.
pan-Methodist brothers and sisters look at it very differently than our ELCA or Episcopal brothers and sisters.
Yeah, the pan-Methodists, you know, I don't think we appreciate always, you know, it's sort of like what we do impacts them. And they're quite concerned.
Hello.
Our friend from the Peninsula, Delaware. Sorry. I was just going to put in a speaking. You have a very unique opportunity.
Can anybody hear?
Bird,
I can't hear anything.
can you hear
Oh,
me?
was I muted?
No, you're just, you're garbled.
Okay, well, go ahead.
No, you're okay now. Try it now.
I think
Okay, I was just going to
No.
suggest to our representative from the Peninsula Delaware Conference of the unique opportunity that in the AUMP Church, which are the two newest sister denominations in the Pan Methodist Commission. We all know the AME Zion, AME CME United Methodist relationship, but now we have the AUMP and the UAME churches that are Peter Spencer churches headquartered in Wilmington, and not just in Delaware and Maryland, but they're not a lot of other places. They're very much smaller denominations, and Peninsula Delaware has a very unique opportunity to be in a relationship there. That's what it was.
Yeah, that's fact. I want to set a time aside. I need to talk to Gene about something that happened here recently. The UAME Church is very much part of our ecumenical group here, and in fact, their
Good, I would think so.
pastor is now their presiding bishop, and he's a really good guy. They're like,
Is that Bishop Amos?
yes, they're much like a lot of us.
Mhm.
You know, their resources are few and far between. They have two very large.
They are
churches.
just like all of us.
The other church that you mentioned, though, and as I meant this, I think we brought up at our UMEIT training first time I ever attended, they're not doing so well, and they're not inclined to be. I mean, a couple of the, as the bishop said, a couple of the Pan Methodist churches are not happy with some of the roads we're taking, and they're standing at arm's length. The UAME church is very mainstream in terms of being part of the, you know, general. They're a good part of the family. As a friend of mine told me, he was with the CME church. He said, if you woke up one morning and there were no United Methodist churches, you just walk on into a UAME church and they'll probably put you to work. And I don't look like most of the folks in the UAME church.
All right, I think Chris Androsky, who is the other Tura, is the one who is about to pipe up with something else.
I adore Tura, but my name is actually, so I mean, I'm okay being a second Tura. My name is actually Chris Androsky. I'm serving just outside of Milwaukee. And our interfaith network has really had our strength in the need to address attacks that have been on other faith communities, the Sikh community, the Muslim community, the Jewish community. And when I see those issues in other faith communities and the way that that they are under such attack and pressure in our community, it makes so many of the divisions within the Christian church seem small. And I think that that creates more of a challenge for us in many ways. I mean, I think the Christian church's own witness is its own worst witness because of our division. And yet, I think it can be a challenge to figure out how we come together when there isn't a presenting crisis or a presenting need that is very clear. And so I'm not sure how we create that sense of urgency within our denominations as well.
Yeah, well put. I think what that also made me think of, so it's kind of like yes and, is that I know that in some of the interreligious gatherings I've been at and been asked to speak at, as well as like in some other United Methodist gatherings in my conference, it's important to note that the people, by and large, at least in the US, who have committed some of these atrocities were very much rooted in a church.
Yes.
And I'm with Dylan Roof, you know, the Lutherans did an amazing job of like really stopping and going, oh my gosh, he was one of us. And the synagogue in California, Paulway, I'm not just calling up the name of the town, but that was a guy who had this so the first parts of his manifesto were sort of basic Christianity, and then they took like a weird turn. And so again, it was something in the church that animated him, probably in conjunction with extreme groups on the internet. And I just think that's like, I've tried to be kind of confessional about that. And, you know, I always, you know, am appalled at the religious connection of that, as we've seen with some other, I'll just call it terrorism, that is religiously connected. And so we have to talk about that. I think that's something we have to talk about ecumenically with those who, the Lutherans, Presbyterians, the UCCs, the others. I mean, they would be in agreement with us on that. And to make sure that our interfaith partner or interfaith friends understand that we recognize it, and in some respects confess it.
Yeah, I think that's really important and not a conversation that we're having enough. So I appreciate that.
Yes. And one of the things Jean knows about me is, you know, I go like, we got to write a letter of sympathy. This is before I was an ecumenical officer. We have to write a letter of sympathy to the Jewish community. And I'm not sure who exactly we would write that to, Jean. I recognize that. But I do want to develop those connections, should we need them, in the hopes that we wouldn't. Like, this is the person we would write to.
Go ahead, Gil.
One of the things that's interesting is, I think
Gil.
if we look at we've
Sorry,
had
Troy.
experience with men's ministry, and focusing just on that within other denominations, we've got a really strange set of folks that meet with us for a day and a half every year. AME, Free Will Baptist, CME,
Yes.
American Baptist, Presbyterian Men, Disciples, PCA, Assemblies of God, Anglican, Lutheran Men in Mission, American Baptist, IPHC, International Pentecostal Holiness Church. And, you know, we never have an argument, you know, because we're centered on the same, we're focused on the same thing of how do we do this better. And maybe that's another way that other groups that could have a focused collection of folks. You know, I'm sure that, I mean, there's people in the within the denomination that knows that we're doing that, but it's not a big, that we don't ask permission. We just meet and get along and have a wonderful, you know, day and a half of presentations and share stuff. And I think that's worked out really well for us. And it's been a learning curve for me and for everybody as to how close we are to each other rather than how distant we are from each other. So there's hope.
And I think when those kind of conversations address things that everybody deals with, whether they want to or not, like racism, or maybe even, racism.
Well, we've talked about racism, and we've talked about sexism. We've talked about, you know, the fact that we have female clergy, female Episcopal leaders, and you know, we've looked at a lot of, and we've done domestic violence work in that area with them as well, and that continues to expand. And you know, there's some that get actively involved in those conversations, and others that sit back and go, yeah, we're not there yet. And that, but we're honest with each other, and that's helpful, at least to step in the right direction. But the only time that we've had one issue was when we tried to explain confirmation to somebody that doesn't do that, and the way that we do, and they kept going, what do you mean confirmation? And we kind of said, well, we baptize children, infants, as well as and there's a group that does and a group that doesn't, and they all kind of looked, and we quickly moved on, decided to move on collectively to something else. But I think you can talk about hard stuff, and if you have a relationship first, and I think that's the key to this, is that we all like each other, irregardless of what denomination we are, and that having, just Bishop Dyck, like you said, the relationships that you have with those within the Jewish committee has really helped, or the Jewish community rather, it really helps in having discussions. You can't do it as a stranger. At least I can't. Maybe others can.
Yeah. I mean, baptism is a good one to have at some point, because that is a dividing line. It's certainly why some splits have happened. It's one of the, I don't know if it's the number one by any means, but it certainly has been. But, you know, so what is baptism? What is grace? Or, you know, why do you baptize people at any age and only once? And that's one of those things that sharpens our own selves, as well as the conversation of why you wouldn't do that. Why would you be, you know, I grew up in the believer's baptism tradition, and, you know, why is that?
May I jump in again for just a second? Yeah, because what you're naming, Gil, is something that's kind of important in the United States ecumenical landscape right now. There's a kind of a couple different ways of doing ecumenism. And one is coming together to write statements and do social justice work, like publish statements against things and work on anti-racism work. There's that whole group that would be more like the National Council of Churches. There's another group that's coming together simply to talk and to get to know each other. That table is broader, as in CCT, Christian Churches Together, but they can do less together. And so they've talked about theology of life recently, and also racism, and but there's kind of two different ways of doing ecumenism in the United States now, and you have clearly named one of them.
Interesting. Thank you.
We are winding down on time, so if anybody has a burning question left, this is your chance. Otherwise, we will commend Bishop Dyck back to the highway, and we will ask Jean to pray for us as we go.
I am sharing.
Great
Oh, sorry, Bishop.
to be with you, though. Sorry about I'm sorry about the video thing to begin with, but
It's okay. Thank you so much for being with us, and we all wish you safe journey as you continue onward home. So,
thank you.
Travel.
I am sharing my screen again in case anybody didn't get to see it. Those are the dates for UMEIT Zoom for 2021, and the Bishop's website for resources and where to go to see the online curriculum that you can sign up for free. And where you can get resources for the Week of Prayer and Unity. All that you should be seeing on your screen right now. I wanted to close us, though, with a prayer that is found at the end of a document that some of you will recognize. It's called Fratelli Tutti. It is the new encyclical put out by my buddy, Pope Francis, who I love very much. And it's his latest encyclical. It's about fraternity, and fraternity literally translates to mean brothers all, and we will forgive him for his male language. But what he's talking about is the lack of social interaction and community amongst people in the world today, and the rise of nationalism and the rise of destructive capitalism that makes some be haves and others be have-nots. I commend it to you. It is being read in the international ecumenical community right now. And there are two prayers at the end. One is an ecumenical Christian prayer, and one is a prayer to the Creator. I would like to end our time today with the prayer to the Creator.